Okay, so as I mentioned, our first speaker here this morning is Thor Oechsner. He's from upstate New York. He'll tell you where he's from. But I first listened to Thor. He was doing an all-day workshop on food-grade small grain production with Harold Wilkin and with John Wepking, right, from Wisconsin. I thought it was just a great workshop.
Cool, thanks.
I enjoyed listening to Thor. He's a lot of fun, and I think brings a unique perspective with his farm from upstate New York. So this morning he's going to kick off kind of talking about his cropping system. There's a lot of diversity, so thanks for coming here, Thor.
Yeah, thanks for inviting me. Thanks, Daniel, Mike. I had a great time yesterday. I thought it was a really informative first day. Yeah, as he said, is this not working? Is it off?
That could be. Or it's dead. Son of a gun. It's dead. I'll click for you.
I can click it here too. We got clicker issues. So anyway, we'll get this figured out. So I'm from New York State. My farm's in what's called the Finger Lakes region in New York. And, oh, this one works.
Left and right.
Let's see. Laser beam is in the center. Oh, yeah. All right. So I got a laser beam. So there's where my farm is. New York City's down here. We're about 5-hour drive from New York City. Contrary to popular belief, New York is majority rural. There's 35,000 working farms in New York State. It's the number 3 dairy state in the nation, number 2 in apples. So it's actually, fairly large in terms of agriculture. A little bit sorry for everybody who listened to this yesterday about we did some farm intro stuff, but just for you that are just here for today, a little bit about me and my farm. I did not grow up on a farm. My dad was a 6th grade social studies teacher. I got interested in agriculture going to my uncle's dairy farm down in Pennsylvania as a kid. I grew up in a small town outside of New York City. And was so fascinated with everything they did there, milking cows and growing corn, that I decided that that's what I wanted to be when I grew up. My uncle's farm went out of business in the 80s, so that was the end of the family farm in my family. So I started from scratch, went to Cornell University, was involved with a friend. I went to school doing a 150 cow dairy after I got out of college. That didn't work out for a variety of reasons, mostly him and his dad fighting a lot. And I moved back to Ithaca and started a VW Audi repair business and didn't really think that was sort of my shot to get into agriculture. So I fixed cars. I bought a little tiny farm, 15-acre place, started doing some vegetables on the side for fun, and certified the 3 acres of vegetables, and then ended up renting a little land, buying a tractor, and the thing snowballed from there, and sold my shop in '97, taught diesel mechanics while I built my land base up. So most of the land in my area was already taken by the established farms. I would go around and look for abandoned land with multifloral rows and trees in it, go in there with my skid steer, clear it, plow it up, and it went right into organic. And by 2003, I quit my job teaching diesel mechanics and was full-time farming at about 400 acres. And we've been 100% farm income ever since. Right now, we're farming about 1,200 acres, all certified organic through ICS. I also have a flour milling operation that I started and a bakery as well. And I'm going to talk after this, do a whole thing on food grade production, because that's sort of the direction that my farm ended up going in. My soils are pretty challenging, lots of stones. I just have to say, I was out yesterday looking at the soil right out here by the grain bins and grain system over there. And you guys out here are blessed with the nicest soil I've ever seen in my life, and I'm totally jealous. So appreciate what you've got, because the farming in New York is difficult at best. That said, I can't do row crops really super well, so the rotation I'm going to show you is the rotation I use on my farm, and it focuses on small grains because that's what grows best. And the thing to think about when you're designing a crop rotation, each farm is its own ecosystem. So what I'm going to show you here is just not necessarily you're going to copy this or this is what you're going to want to do, but just open your mind, look at your farm, and think about these different things that we do. I've been organic farming a long time, and I've sort of seen what works and what doesn't work over the long haul. And so I'll try to tell you how I came to those decisions and how they affect what I do. And we're going to go into a little bit of some production stuff on small grains. Some of you experienced guys, I don't want to bore you with it, but there might be some things here that are useful to you. And certainly, I come to these things because I love farmers. I love talking to farmers. And, if anybody, I want to talk to anybody here who's interested, or you might see something that I'm doing and have a comment, and if I can learn from you as well, I'm all ears. So what do I think about when I think about a crop rotation, and what are the goals of a crop rotation on my farm? I'd say one of the big things to always keep in mind is you need diversity. We're, as organic farmers, trying to mimic nature. And nature is full of diversity. Nature is not corn and soybeans back and forth. So think about that and what that does for you, because you don't have a lot of means for controlling disease. Varying and using a lot of diversity has been really important in controlling diseases on my farms. I started out using a lot of small grains back and forth, and I ran into major septoria issues and rust problems, and those were associated with me when I started out not knowing how much I needed diversity in my rotation. Other thing we have to think about is the nutrient demands of the different crops, and we want to always vary that. We never want to have a crop that's a heavy feeder followed by another heavy feeder followed by another heavy feeder. You always want to think about what are the nutrient demands of the crop and always vary those year to year as best you can. The other big thing, and yesterday we were talking about what tools in your shed are most important for weed control. And I said my biggest one was my crop rotation. Crop rotation will save you weed headaches like you cannot believe. And just trust me on this, because I got into problems. If you plant the same thing at the same time all the time and do tillage at the same time, like a corn and soybean rotation, you will, I can guarantee you, run into problems with weeds on an organic farm in a big way. And the more you can vary when you do tillage and when you plant your different crops in terms of dates and seasons, the more you keep weeds off balance, and the easier this will become instead of the more difficult this will become. I also have a lot of perennial weed problems, and I need a bare fallow period in my rotation to try to control those perennial weeds. A lot of these perennial weeds have rhizomes, and the only way I found to kill rhizomes is through a bare fallow period and then a smother crop. And I'll go over how this works in our rotation, but I don't know if this is a problem in the Midwest, but I'm guessing if it's a problem in New York, it's probably got perennial weed issues out here too. The other thing I think is really important is to give the soil a rest. We're doing a lot of tillage here. We're destroying soil structure. We're burning up organic matter as part of what we do. Agriculture is sort of this process of destruction and regeneration, and we need to balance those two things out in the soil. So for me, I build in a rest period, and that, I'll show you what that looks like. I mean, we have in one of our rotations, the rotation I'm going to focus on, a 36-month period where the soil isn't tilled at all. So I think that's really important to counteract some of the effects of tillage. And of course, we always want to try, whenever we can fit a cover crop in, we always want to try to build soil, and we always want to try to protect the soil as much as possible. You know, there's certain periods where the soil it's going to be bare, but we have to think about protecting it. Another big feature in a crop rotation for me is flexibility. The weather doesn't cooperate, markets open up, something happens and you have to plant more of this or less of this. So how can this rotation be built so, you know, I can come in and out of it or exit at certain points to go to other crops so that I have flexibility in terms of both marketing and which crops go in. You know, you sit down, you figure this whole thing out and it looks good on paper, and you all know how that is in the winter. You're thinking about your next season, and then, you know, everything goes haywire and you need to go on the fly. Well, that needs to be built into your crop rotation. For me, also demands on labor and machinery. It's me and two other guys doing these 1,200 acres. We're spread out over 25 miles. My average field size is about 7 acres. You know, we're going like crazy all year long. I need to spread out. You know, I can't be planting 400 acres of organic corn and try to get that cultivated. It's not going to happen. So I use a lot of different crops. So all season long, we're harvesting and planting something throughout the season, and that just spreads that out so that I'm, you know, not going completely bananas trying to get this done, and I have enough labor to get it done. So for me, because most of my soils are HEL classified, I'm on a lot of sloping ground. I have a lot of strip crops. So this rotation has to fit into a plan where I don't have 2 strips plowed up at the same time. You know, and that's just a pretty obvious thing, but something I think about. And this was talked about yesterday, and I think we all know this. You know, you always try to have live roots growing in the ground all the time, as much as you can. You know, that's so important for the soil microbiology. That's so important for having healthy soils. Always try to keep something growing, you know, fit 2 crops in at the same time, you know, cover crops and interseeding. All those things are really important. So that's just some of the basics of that. I use a bunch of different crop rotations. I'm just going to sort of look at, this is sort of my 2 main ones. They're pretty much the same. You can see we'll start out with year 1 with corn and with ryegrass interseeded. And then I typically go to buckwheat on most of my ground, but I also sometimes plant soybeans in there and then go to a winter grain with clover interseeded. And then we typically do 2 years of red clover. The first year we'll harvest it. The second year, typically, we just let that be and cut it and let the soil regenerate, feed the microbes in the soil, and then we'll go in and sometimes we'll no-till oats into it in the fall, or a brassica. Sometimes, depending on the stand, we might till it up and plant a brassica, put our manure on then, and then we'll go into spring wheat, spring crop, with a mixed cover crop after it. Right here, we could also go to a year 7 and go and plant triticale if maybe we have a demand for triticale seed. Someone wants that. Maybe we want to put spelt in, you know. Maybe we need more winter wheat acres. We could also plow this spring wheat down and go into a winter grain here, plant a cover crop after that, and go into corn. So this is sort of a 6 to 7 year deal, but you see within that, I've only got corn in there once. So, let's see. So this is just, that's looking at that crop rotation one. This is just to illustrate, and we could look at a bunch of different things here, but I just wanted to illustrate planting dates. Now, if you look at that, there's when the crop is typically planted as you go through the rotation: corn, buckwheat, winter grain, red clover, spring wheat, and back to corn. And if you look at that, through that rotation, there's never really a point where the same crop has the same planting date through that rotation until you get back to corn. So the weeds that are going to be a problem in corn are not going to be a problem in our buckwheat, and they're not going to be a problem in our winter grain, and they're not going to be a problem in our red clover. You know, they're going to, the pigweed and lamb's quarter, those two velvet leaf, the weeds that are really going to drive you bananas with corn, you know, this gives that rotation a long time period out of the window where those weeds typically like to germinate, and they like to germinate also in a high fertility environment, which corn supplies. You know, they don't get another chance to do that until 6 years later. And that really decreases the weed seed bank, and that really decreases the problems you have the next time you put the corn in. So, you know, when you're thinking about this crop rotation, map it out like that. Make yourself a little chart and look at, all right, well, how is this all stacking up in terms of varying my planting dates? You know, and this you could also see, do that with your harvest and planting schedules and how you're going to get that done. You could do a similar chart with looking at ground cover. Do I have the ground covered? So these are all things I sort of doodle on pieces of paper when I'm thinking about how I'm going to go through this. So just going to go through the rotation, look at how each one of these crops fits. You know, corn, heavy feeder, right? Corn loves nitrogen. Planted late May, sometimes into June. You know, I'm up in the hills, so I'm planting these early season corns, and I'm planting these flint corn hybrids, these plenic corns for my flour mill. You know, they kind of will top out at about 120 bushels an acre, but I get almost $16 a bushel for that corn. So it's really profitable for me. And we go in, because we're always trying to have live roots, we're going to go in and we're going to seed annual ryegrass into that corn. Now you can see the kind of soil that I have in New York. We got lots of stones there. If anybody wants some, they're on sale next month. I sell them by the ton. We can have them airdropped on any field in Indiana. I keep threatening my buddy Harold that I'm going to bring him rocks in a helicopter and drop them on his farm. So what we do is, on our last cultivation, guy's going through with a cultivator. We have another guy with a broadcast spreader. Annual ryegrass is super light. It's like fluff. And it'll only, with a pendulum spreader, it'll only go 15 feet. So it's a bit of driving, but you just bomb through there and you just spread the stuff right over that freshly tilled ground. And the next time it rains, you'd be amazed. That stuff starts coming up, and it does really well under the shade. There it is. Once that corn senesces in the fall and the canopy opens up, it doesn't compete with the corn. When the corn's growing strong and there's lots of leaves there to shade it, but once that opens up in the fall and it cools down, this stuff really takes off under there. If you've got cattle or livestock to graze on this, it's awesome. Look at that. You get the corn off, you've got this beautiful green, thick, lush lawn under there. It's got a really nice root system, goes deep, it breaks up compaction. It'll also take all that excess N that could be in there from that clover plow down or whatever you did. It'll capture it and hold it in the soil, in that root system. So it also can be nice in a wet fall for traction. Get your combine through the field. Works really well. It's like driving on a green carpet. So that stuff typically winter kills, and the next year we're going to go in with buckwheat. I'm going to talk a little bit about the poor maligned buckwheat plant. I don't know how big a crop this is in Indiana, probably not a very big one. When I talk about this in New York, everyone boos me because nobody likes planting buckwheat. I think buckwheat is essential in an organic crop rotation. It is an absolutely wonderful crop for the soil. And buckwheat is a very light feeder, all right? So we're had our heavy feeder, we're going to a light feeder. The other thing about buckwheat is when you till that corn, all that corn stalks in, all that heavy lignin, heavy carbon will tie up a lot of nitrogen as the bacteria in the soil break it down, and that can be really good because we don't want a lot of nitrogen for a buckwheat crop. So what buckwheat does for me, besides being a cash crop, it's also a cover crop. We're going to bare fallow the soil until we plant it mid-June to early July. And bare fallowing, I'll talk about a little more, is just a process of not letting anything photosynthesize, right? So you're just tilling the soil with a field cultivator or something. Every couple weeks I go out there and I just look as soon as those rhizomous weeds start coming up. And the rhizomous weeds that are big problems on my farm are quackgrass, bindweed, and Canadian thistle are big ones for me. And all those plants have underground stolons and rhizomes that accumulate starches and sugars in them. And if you just plow those or till those up with a disc and chop them up, they'll just keep coming up and coming up. The only way I have found to kill them is to starve them to death. So to starve them to death, you can't let the shoots that come up photosynthesize, because as soon as they photosynthesize, they bring the sugars back down into the rhizomes, and the rhizomes will continue living. So we have to starve them basically by not letting them photosynthesize. And then when we plant the buckwheat comes up. Anybody who's grown it knows this. You put it in, it comes up and out of the ground like wildfire. I mean, this stuff grows like nuts. And it comes up and shades the ground really, really fast. So once you've sort of beaten those rhizomous weeds down, put the buckwheat on, by the time those weakened plants try to once again put their shoots up, the buckwheat smothers it, starves it of sunlight, and you can effectively control it that way. Other thing this does for us, and I'll show you, is it lines up a possibility for a really nice no-till opportunity in the fall, and we'll look at what that looks like. The other thing that's great about buckwheat, it shares no diseases with anything. It doesn't even have any diseases itself, all right? It's a really easy crop to grow, super low input. All you got to do is put the seed on. Once you get it in, it takes care of itself. There's no other weed control methods you got to do. You plant it, you go get yourself a nice cold beer, put a couple pork chops on the grill, and relax. It's a great crop. So there's bare fallowing. Bare fallowing equals no photosynthesis, and you can see we're pulling up these clumps of rhizomes. Like to do this on a nice hot day, pull those rhizomes up, let them dry out on the soil surface. It's a good way to kill them. You know, but is this the best thing to do for the soil? No, we're kind of beating the crap out of it. But I have not figured out another way to do it, and that's also why I try to build that 36-month fallow period into it for the soil to regain structure, because of some of the things like this that we do that we know aren't maybe the best. So if you're going to plant buckwheat for grain, I wouldn't go over 35 pounds to the acre. Buckwheat tends to get really leggy. Some of the food grade varieties like Kodo, which is a Japanese variety that's used in soba noodles, it's pretty popular if you contract with Burkett Mills, which is the biggest buckwheat mill. They're in Penn Yan, New York, I think in the nation. They're always looking for buckwheat. Organic buckwheat pays 33 cents a pound, all right, which is pretty good. I mean, it's almost as high as soybeans when you figure it out. Yields about 35 bushels to the acre. If you plant it heavier than that, and they're going to want to sell you 50 pounds per acre, don't put 50 pounds in because it'll go flat on you. I can tell you that from experience. If you want to just do this as a cover crop, want the maximum amount of shading effect, then I would go 50 pounds. But then that you've got a good chance if you decide that you want to harvest it, that it's going to be flat. And I also see right there, somebody forgot to pick a rock that we're going to hit later. So So buckwheat is at full bloom and seed set at 6 weeks. The stuff grows like crazy. So you can see 6 weeks after we planted that ground, the buckwheat's about this tall, and it's flowering already. That's why it works so great as a weed control crop. So there's a couple ways we can go, and right here is where you have to decide, because it's going to set most of its seed at 6 weeks. At 5 weeks, you got to go, all right, am I going to use this as a cover crop, or am I going to let this go for seed? So this is a machine every organic farm needs to have. This is a swather. Self-propelled. I got that out of Alberta, Canada. That's where they are. It was off a canola farm. And it's got 2 rubber belts. It's got a draper head on it that drops everything into the center. It's real gentle. This is what we use to harvest buckwheat for seed. Right here, we're cutting it to make buckwheat baleage out of it. It was a drought year. There's a 500-cow organic dairy near us. They needed feed. They wanted to try it, so we cut it, and we baled it and made baleage out of it. They had it tested. It tested better than their alfalfa hay. So it's a high-quality forage. That said, if you're going to feed it to cows, you need to put it in a TMR because they don't really like it straight. Don't ask me why, but they don't. So that is a possibility. It's quick forage. Now, if you're going to combine it, you swath it at about 11 to 12 weeks. You let it sit in the windrow. Once you got the stuff knocked down, you got to go out early in the morning. We got it up about 2, and we start swathing while it's nice and wet with a dew. The seeds are very, very, very sensitive to falling off. And the thing about buckwheat is an indeterminate plant, which means it sets seed, and there's mature seed all at once. It doesn't senesce right away like a wheat plant. So even when we've swathed it in the fall, there's still going to be some green berries on there or even flowers. Once you cut it and put it in a windrow, it's not like hay or something that you cut and it just dies. It sits there in the windrow and finishes maturing in the windrow. The other thing that's really awesome about it is it can rain on it, it can snow on it. It's another time where you get the beer and the pork chops out and you just relax. Because once you have it swathed, you just wait for it to dry down and you combine it. The deer don't eat it. It's really amazing that way. And once it gets brown like that and you pick it up, it'll go right through the combine like smoke. It combines really, really easy. And we're going to chop the straw right back down on the field. You can see if we've done a good job with our weed control, we've got a nice weed-free seed bed there that we can go in and we can no-till. That ground is so nice and fluffy after that buckwheat. It's a piece of cake to go in there with a no-till drill. We have a John Deere 455 min-till drill. We punch it in with that too after buckwheat. So we'll go in and do that if the field turns out nice and clean. Now, if it's a rainy year and we haven't been able to do our bare fallowing, that doesn't work out, then sometimes it doesn't. And there's us checking your seeding depth, especially if you're going into rye. And this is something I didn't know. Rye is super sensitive to planting depth. And I'm sure all you rye growers know this. You know, there's a saying in Germany, a kid's nursery rhyme, rye likes to see the sky. And what that means is rye does not like to go in very deep. If you go much beyond 3/4 of an inch with rye, if you punch that in 1.25 inches, 1.5 inches, you're going to cut your yield right off the bat by 1/3 just by planting it too deep. It's very sensitive. So watch your planting depth, particularly with rye. And if we did everything right, that's what you get. That's what you end up with. And it's a really nice, you got lots of trash on the surface. You get a nice no-till opportunity here. And when I pull this off, I just feel great about it. It's totally awesome. If it's a weedy mess, sometimes we'll go in with chisel plow with sweeps on it and hit it once to chop the weeds, and then go in with a culti planter and a drill and plant into that. We still got a nice mulch on the surface. Or we'll take our min-till drill and just punch into it with that. So once we get that winter grain, and that winter grain could be wheat, it could be rye, it could be triticale, it could be spelt, doesn't matter, whatever your market is. Because of my flour mill, we're doing hard red winter wheat mostly, soft white winter wheat, and rye. And I do some triticale on a seed contract with King's Agri-Seeds, but I don't grow a lot of triticale. I used to grow a lot of spelt. I don't grow that much of it anymore. Wheat particularly is a heavy feeder, so you can see we've gone from heavy feeder to light feeder back to heavy feeder. We put layer manure on, usually in the fall, plant into it, and that's seeded in September to early October. So we've gone from May to July to September, October on our planting dates. So we're varying our planting dates. I chop all my straw back on the field to build organic matter. I don't have any cattle. I don't really think without livestock you can have a really truly sustainable farm, even an organic one. I'm purchasing a lot of manure. So wherever I can try to keep my soil organic matter up and chop things back on it, I forego that bit of money just because I feel like it's the right thing to do. And I see the improvements in the soil that makes. So we're going to go in and we're going to frost seed clover into that. And then I often top dress this in the spring at green up with a little Chilean. One of the problems we ran into with growing winter wheat, there's that period in the spring where the soil's still really cold, but the wheat has just started growing and there's this big growth spurt that it wants to put on and it wants to tiller, and those tillers really improve your yield. Another thing I'll just say about rye, everybody says, oh, plant your rye, you could plant that really late in the fall. Well, another fact about rye a lot of guys don't know is rye sets its tillers in the fall. So if you miss that, if you get that in late and it doesn't tiller, that's going to kill your yield. And both of those planting depth things that I talked about and the timing of planting rye, those two things were killing my rye yields for years. I couldn't figure out why I couldn't get better rye yields. Now a lot of times on our yield monitor, we're getting over 70 bushels an acre on our Danko rye. So it's helped a lot. But a little bit of Chilean, I don't know how I really feel ethically about Chilean, but when the soil's cold in the spring and before the microorganisms have started mineralizing nitrogen for that wheat and it really needs a kick to start tillering, just a little, that's not a lot of Chilean nitrate. A little bit of Chilean nitrate will do wonders, So we're frost seeding red clover at about 12 to 15 pounds to the acre. You can also see how nice that seed bed is with the buckwheat mulch on there. We've got a nice cover over the ground. There's the clover come in after, chop the straw back on it. Clover is sort of the fertility foundation of my farm. It grows really well in my soils. So I owe a lot to that plant. So year 4 and 5, you can leave this in for a year if you want. You can leave it in for 2 years. By year 3, the thing is totally petered out. I mean, clover is kind of almost a biennial, it's a perennial by classification, but it's a biennial because it gets phytoph or root rot really bad. And we've trialed a lot of different red clovers. There's some of these longer-lived red clovers. And the only one we found that's really great is called Millivis. And Millivis is a German variety, and it's got a nice fine stem, makes really nice silage, and we did a trial on a farm that was 160 acre. It had been in conventional corn, hadn't had clover on it forever. We split that farm up and planted 4 different clover varieties to see how they would last over the years, and we kept them in for 3 years. And all of them were pretty petered out. So we're going to establish that. Red clover is awesome. Alfalfa is the same way. It's got a nice strong taproot, helps break up plow pans, compacted soil, lets our soil rest, as I was talking about, And of course, it's a great nitrogen fixer. It'll give you 150 pounds of N when you plow it down. Can stay in 1 or 2 years. If we put it in for 2 years, you know, that's where we get our 36-month rest after we no-till our rye or wintergrain or wheat in on year 3. So we'll harvest it the first year, and then the second year, I just call it a soil building year. If you got cattle, you could harvest it again for baleage. You could do a lot of different things to it. For me, as I said, that's my give back year to the soil. So first cutting, we bale it and wrap it. You should go listen today. Scott Myers is going to talk about making high quality hay. I wish I could go to that. There's a lot of money to be made in making hay for organic dairies and stuff. We have a strong dairy industry. It's something that we enjoy doing. And I think, doing some haying is going to be part of being an organic crop farmer. It's not going to be just crops. You're going to be making hay. You gotta put perennial forages into your rotation. There's no way around it. Just accept it. Go buy yourself a baler. Make connections with some of these farmers and start baling and wrapping. It's a good time, I think. Everybody on my farm likes it. In our second cutting, we're going to combine off the clover seed on that. So, that's done in the early fall usually where I am. We'll go in terms of cutting it. What we found is the best tool to do that is just a straight disc cutter bar with no conditioner on it, and just lay it all the way flat in the field. And then after that gets crispy, we'll go in early in the morning again with lots to do, and we'll windrow that, let it dry out, and then we'll combine it. That's sort of what the windrows look like. You can see all those heads in there, juicy heads with lots of seed on them. I find the seed is heaviest on a dry year. I don't really know why. Wetter years we get less seed yield. Maybe somebody here knows the answer to that. Here's also a look at the windrow. You can see all those little clover heads in there. If anybody's interested in this, I can talk to them about how to set your combine up to do a good job threshing this. There you go across the field combining clover seed. Your neighbor will probably think your combine's on fire because it is one dusty job, I'll tell you that. It's crazy dusty. You want that clover windrow just as black and funky and ugly as you could possibly make it. Another great thing about this is we're just taking all those little seeds off, right? But we're putting all that organic matters going back on the field out the back of the combine. So that's a plus for us. So our yields in New York are typically 100 to 250 pounds. We get $3 a pound for it. So you look at that clover crop, we've got all those bales of hay that we've made out of it. We've got this clover seed crop. So it's more than just a cover crop. For me, it's a really important cash crop. And we have cleaning equipment at the farm, and I'm going to talk about on-farm processing in the next session. But, clover seed is a really great value-added enterprise that works really nicely into an organic cash crop. And there's always people looking for clover seed. This is really easy to sell. Even if you don't clean it, you talk to some of the seed companies around, they might have varieties they want, but this is something you can do. You got to diversify to make your rotation work. In order to make your rotation diversified, you got to diversify your markets. It all goes together. So we grow spring wheat, and I know I've hooked Harold into growing spring wheat now. This probably is not a typical crop out here, I don't know. It certainly isn't in New York, but spring wheat, for me as a flour, somebody has to supply my flour mill, the best quality bread flour is made out of spring wheat, super high quality. So, and spring wheat, like all these spring grains, the most important thing I could say about growing spring wheat, get it in early. You know, this year we heard that the farmers up in Quebec, from a guy I know in Vermont, Jack Laser, his book is back there. It's called The Organic Grain Grower. I would recommend reading it if you're interested in small grains. He's a super smart guy, and it's a fun read. It's not dry at all. Was talking to him, and he was saying up in Quebec what they do is they go in with a no-till drill in March, and when there's about 1/4 inch of frost on the ground, they punch the spring wheat right through the frost with a no-till drill to get it in early, and it comes up through. So we're going to do about 50 acres of that this spring into soybean stubble and see how it works, because we couldn't get our winter grain in because I'm sure it was wet as anything here, but we had the wettest fall in 134 years of weather data up in my section of New York. It was really wet. We didn't finish combining soybeans until the 17th of January in the snow. It was maybe the same here. I saw some soybeans that weren't even harvested on the way. So it was the same here, yeah. So anyway, so this is a super early crop. So the weeds that are going to be a problem in our other crops, totally different set of weeds, different set of tillage times. You know, you always need to have a spring grain in your rotation. Now this could be oats. For me, it's spring wheat because of the mill. And after it gives us an opportunity to put a cover crop in. We can interseed a cover crop right into it too. I'm always chopping straw. And then again, we've got another heavy feeder because we're coming out of red clover. Sometimes that last year red clover, we'll put in a brassica, you know, just for diversity's sake, because that's a totally different set of diseases that go in there. So you can, if you want to air seed red clover into this, again, what we found is there's an autotoxicity thing with clover. So when we're coming out of clover and going back into clover, we're having trouble getting good stands. So we've gone to putting the cover crop in after it. You know, too much, clover's a great crop, but again, the same principles, diversity, diversity, diversity. I went back to the well too many times with red clover and started realizing that my stands and my spring wheat sucked. And then I started asking around why was that. And just like alfalfa, you plow alfalfa down and put alfalfa in, you're going to have problems. So, so after we harvest the spring wheat, early summer, we can, if we've got some weed issues, we can put a bare fallow in. Sometimes I'll put a short buckwheat crop in between when I put my spring wheat in, if I want to plant a winter grain after this and go to a 7-year. Or we might put oats, peas, brassicas, or a cover crop cocktail in after that, so we can go and put corn in after it. So it gives you, you know, it's nice to have portions of your crop rotation where you've got some choices and you can mess around and have some fun. You know, put different, I love planting different cover crops and seeing what they do. I mean, this whole thing's like a giant science experiment, this organic farming thing. And if you go at it with the right amount of gusto and a little bit of ignorance and a little bit of inquisitiveness, you can have a lot of fun just seeing what happens and doing little experiments and trying different crops. You know, be inventive, be curious. So, you know, one of the keys to spring grains and organic is, you know, weed pressure can be a problem if you don't get it in on time. And it's really important to do some good time weeding. The earlier you get the crop in, the better your weed control will be. I've had years where we've gotten this thing in early March, and I've had almost no weeds at all, and not even tine weed it. If it's a late spring and you get the crop in towards the end of April, I can almost guarantee you're going to have to do some weed control. That's actually a spelt seed. Probably you guys knew that. Or actually, no, that isn't. I think that's an emmer seed. We used to grow a lot of emmer. Does anybody know what emmer is? It's sort of the precursor of all modern wheats. We had a contract with a food service company that made like a veggie burger out of emmer, and we were growing this for them. It's an ancient grain, but it was a lot of fun to grow. So, the reason I was showing you that is not to talk about emmer. The reason I was showing you that is because when you plant that spring wheat or those oats, when the seed looks like that, that's when you want to go in and do your first tine weeding to take care. It's, we call it blind harrowing or pre-emergent tine weeding. This is really, really critical. So hold it, I gotta hit so we're going across the field before the crop comes up, setting those tines so they're going down. We plant the crop about 1.5 inches, they're going down 3/4 of an inch, and just getting any of those weeds that are in the white hair stage. We talked about this yesterday. You experienced farmers know this already, but this is a really critical step to good spring grain control of weeds. And the next time we're going to want to go in there is about the 3 or 4 leaf stage. So you can see we got a few little guys going here. And these are the guys we're going to want to go in and take care of. And we're going to go in, and we put an air seeder on our tine weeder so we can interseed into small grains with it if we want. I would recommend that. It's been really handy. It's great for hay seedings. We can go in at that point and put our seeding in. You could put alfalfa timothy seeding in, whatever you want. But this allows you to put that seeding in and get that pre-emergent tine weeding in. So if you plant the hay seeding in with the crop, which is obviously efficient, when you go in and do that pre-emergent tine weeding, you're going to kill your seeding. So this allows us to get our weed control and also get a seeding in. So we're going to go in, and we're pretty aggressive with this machine. You can see here it's kicking up a lot of stones, and really it's tearing up a bunch of the crop. So we seed the crop pretty heavy. We put in at least 160 bushels, sometimes 160 pounds to 180 pounds of seed. So it's a heavy crop because we're going to take a bunch of this crop out with our tine weeder. And I'll just say for you guys who haven't used one of these, I was physically nauseous the first time I did this. This goes against everything you've ever been taught as a farmer. Take care of your crop, don't blah, blah, blah. You're going to go in there and make it look like absolute crap. And all your neighbors are going to come out and think, what the hell did that guy do to that? Because it's going to look like shit. I'm just telling you, it's going to be terrible. So here's a little this was my first nausea moment with the tine weeder. So up there was this spring wheat crop I go to, and the picture doesn't do, it was a weedy mess. This was a train wreck in mid-destruction. This crop was not going to make it. And I went in there with my tine weeder, and you can see number 2, right? There's nothing left. I went up there and I did that, and I came home and I said, Rachel, I think I just killed that crop. And drinking didn't help. Nothing helped. I had just done something really, really wrong. And so what I went in here, because I thought I was going to lose the crop, I went down one direction, I turned that thing around, and I came back the other direction, and I just buried that thing and I just basically covered the whole crop in soil. Well, you can see I said, Rachel, why don't you go up there and take pictures of it every week just so we can see what the heck happens here. Again, this is a big experiment, right, guys? So there's it after about a week or so. Then you can see that, I think that's about 2 or 3 weeks later. Look at how thick it is. That crop actually liked it. That beating that I gave it made that thing tiller like crazy. And all those weeds got buried under the soil, and the spring wheat just exploded. And there you go. That's the spring wheat crop. That's that very same field, looking down at it from the top. So that taught me something. That taught me, A, don't look back, and B, if you got to go in there, you can go in there, and these crops will take a lot of punishment. And spring wheat in particular, I'll just say with oats, you can't hit it quite as hard. It's not as tough, but spring wheat is just a tough customer. So we've gotten very unshy about punishing our crops relentlessly with a tine weeder. So after we get our glorious spring wheat crop off that's so weed-free, we go in, if we're going to plant a cover crop after it, we go in, we use a moldboard plow a lot just because of the soil types I have, and I hate moldboard plows. So we're trying to leave more trash on the surface, do less inversion tillage, and so maybe you guys are already doing this, maybe you're not. We found that a chisel plow with these ridge till sweeps on it, so you can see how that works. When that's going through the soil, we've got a 5-inch overlap there. That's like a gigantic knife that's 4 inches under the soil, and it dislocates all the weeds, everything growing like a big knife from its root base, leaves all the trash on the surface. I'll just say if you get these ridge till sweeps, you can get them through Shoop or whatever to fit on your chisel. We've found that because of the way I'm using them as a primary tillage, they tend to wear right in the neck. So we just MIG weld on some old points just to, because we found that the neck was wearing out actually before the rest of it. But you can see that the overlap is key, because no weed can dodge that. Everything is cut. And so we're going in there, and you can see, if you went and grabbed that, you just pick it up, and it's loose underneath. Then you can go in with a disc and just lightly till the surface or a field cultivator and kill all those weeds and leave all that trash on the surface. And those ridge till sweeps pull easy, because you're not really lifting anything, you're just cutting. So you can just bomb right through there with we have, I think it's a 21 shank chisel plow, and we just bomb through there and cut it. So this is a real good way to kill the weeds and get a nice seed bed. And then, I was talking before about brassicas. I really like to include a brassica in the rotation. It doesn't have any diseases with any other crops. And we'll put in, we've tried forage rape, forage turnip. If you wanted a crop that was going to overwinter for some reason, you could put canola in, a winter canola. It's pretty cheap. You don't have to put much seed down. And it does all these things. It's a disease break crop. It's great at getting any of that excess N that's left over from the spring wheat crop and tying it up. It's got a nice taproot that, again, is breaking up the soil. These types, you can get types that winter kill. That's what we put in. And I'll just caution you, radishes talked about a lot. It's tillage radishes, that's a great crop. If you want to get into doing food grade, stay away from radish. Radish is exactly the same size as a wheat seed, and it's a gigantic pain in the ass to get out of the wheat. You need a gravity table, and you can get docked for radish in there if you're going to a flour mill or something. Those radish seeds, it's just like a wild radish, and I'll talk about wild radish in the next session. When that's ground, it imparts this radishy flavor to the wheat. First time I bought tillage radish and I opened up the bag and looked at the seed size, I sent the whole lot of it back. I had 2 pallets of it. I just wasn't going to plant it because they couldn't guarantee me there would be no hard seed. And then it becomes a weed problem, and then you've got problems. All right, so just be mindful of that. If you're just going to grow feed, maybe it's not a big issue, but if you think you want to go down a food grade path, don't plant tillage radish. So we pack that, we just broadcast it over that surface and then roll it. And there's what it looks like coming up. You can see we've got a nice bit of straw and residue on the surface to help protect it. So this was the first year I did this, and I thought I was pretty cool because I had such a nice thick stand. That is way too thick. I think I put that in at 10 pounds to the acre or something ridiculous. I didn't know what I was doing. That choked itself out and was a terrible crop. So I'd say one thing I learned about these turnips and rape, 3 pounds maximum. not a lot of seed, and you'll end up something that looks more like that. Makes a really, really nice cover crop. And there it is in the winter, starting to die. I'll say that it doesn't all die, but most of it dies. So you'll have to till that in. You can put, it loves nutrients. So if you're going into corn after this, great time to put a whole bunch of hog manure on, or we use dried poultry manure from layer houses. Great time to put that down. Have the cover crop absorb that and hold it over the winter for you. There's a little close-up of it. Yeah, I would say typically, I mean, it depends on snow cover, but I would say 80% of it croaks. If there's a lot of snow and we don't, it doesn't get real frosted off, then you can have a lot more in the spring that's going to grow. Other thing we've been messing around with, and I encourage people to just experiment with these cover crops. I was part of a cover crop, they called it cocktails trial with Penn State University, where we were putting in after winter grain or spring grain, we're putting in all these mixes of different crops, and this has come into vogue now. I see there's lots of it. I think Andy was saying he has a 14 species mix that he's using, which I want to find out what it is. But this was what was in the one I used, Austrian winter peas, triticale, canola, and crimson clover. I'm particularly impressed with crimson clover. That is a really cool crop. The crimson clover seed, see that guy right there? It's about twice the size of a red clover seed. And I'll just say in a late summer, fall planted, late summer, early fall planted cover crop mix, red clover didn't do anything. It just doesn't have time to grow. So I think that was a total waste of time in that mix. But we had really good results, putting this in as a mix with a drill. And I had a lot of fun growing it. We had great corn yields afterwards and nice clean fields. So, I would say, do some experimenting with these mixes, talk to your local seed supplier, see what they've got, read up on all these different species and see what they might do for you. There's a little picture of, I gave it to a friend of mine who's got a garden, because I had some leftover seed and she grew it in her garden and made me a cover crop mixture bouquet. So, yeah. So, this is the crimson clover right here. You can see this has got just an amazingly beautiful flower. We tried to grow it for seed last year in one of our Japanese millet. We grow Japanese millet for seed, and I didn't have any luck, but we're going to try to put it in for seed again this year and see if we can't turn that into a seed crop. So this is the Austrian winter pea here. And Fred Meyer was telling me that they combine that for seed, grow it as a seed crop. So if you're interested in Austrian winter peas, I was talking to them about that yesterday. I think that's something I might try. That sounds pretty cool. So, and then we plow that down. There's some rye and winter pea mix that we put in that we're plowing. This is always fun and feel-good stuff. And then we're back to our corn, and that's the end of the rotation. So that's the rotation I use on my farm. I'm not saying that's going to work out here or on your farm. As I said, every farm is different. And the fun part is discovering what are these, looking at these crops and seeing what works and doesn't work on your farm. So I'm out of time. I think we got 3 minutes left. If there's a question or something, we could probably answer it. So.
There was one question, or a couple people asked some questions around your interseeding of annual ryegrass into corn. One was asking why not, a mix of annual ryegrass and clover, or just clover. And I thought perhaps with the following crop being buckwheat, perhaps that's the nitrogen isn't part of your goal for the buckwheat, but
that you answered the question. Yeah, I mean, you got to think about You know, in my particular case, that annual ryegrass, I'm going into buckwheat, right? And buckwheat is a light feeder. I don't want to put a legume in there because if I plow down, and I have done this before I knew enough, I plowed down red clover and planted buckwheat in it, and the buckwheat got this tall and was flat as a pancake. It just can't take nitrogen. So you gotta, when you're thinking about this, you gotta know what's coming next. Now, if you were gonna put something in there, and I have seeded red clover and ryegrass together into corn, and it works really well. I've seeded straight red clover into corn, and it works really well. But it depends, you gotta think about what comes next, and that informs the cover crop. So, you know, for me, annual ryegrass works good in that rotation because, yes, it absorbs the excess N, and I'm sure some of that goes into the, you know, goes in with the buckwheat, but because corn is got all that heavy stover that's really difficult to break down, that is just getting all that nitrogen tied up and breaking down that corn stover, and that buckwheat works really well because it doesn't even want any of that N. So that would be the only reason I wouldn't put a legume in there. So,
Okay.
yeah.
So because of time, we're going to go ahead and break to try to get back on schedule here. Could we show Thor our appreciation?
Thanks, everybody.